Welcome to another episode of the Symphony Podcast, where we break down one important topic each week in under 30 minutes or less. This is Kyle, and I'm sitting here with Matthew in the building again. We're talking today about how doing hard things on a regular basis is good for you in a lot of different ways, both mentally and physically. Basically, the premise stemmed from when you're a kid, you're doing hard things naturally all the time. Like you're just, putting your shoes on, tying your shoes is a challenge. Learning how to ride a bike is a challenge. As we get older, we kind of master all the basic skills of getting around in the world. And we naturally do less hard things unless we intentionally bring those things into our life. So that's kind of the premise. And then you were going to start off by just talking a little bit about your perspective on it.
Yeah. And that's an interesting point to start it with, is in your childhood, because you are constantly learning things and you're constantly transforming and evolving, and you're right, you don't know how to tie your shoes, and then your dad teaches you and it's really hard, and then you learn how to do it, and then from there on it's boom, know how to tie my shoes, on to the next thing. And there's constantly that, even when you're walking, you're going towards those feelings of imbalance as a child when you're trying to get wobbly on your legs, and then all of a sudden you're walking one day, but it's but you have to do that thing and go towards it. But I feel like you're right. When we get to be adults, we just feel like that process stops, or we stop learning because we know how to do the everyday things. And that's why I think it's important to remind yourself that we can continue to evolve. We can continue to throw ourselves into challenging situations. And I think it's important to do that just for your own life, just because life is going to throw difficult situations at you, no matter who you are. So if you can purposely put those types of things, challenging activities into your life, it'll kind of train your brain to think about challenging things as a beneficial thing rather than something that scares you. And so then when something does come up in the world that really rattles you, maybe you have a better toolkit to be able to deal with that when it's out of your control in that way.
And what's fascinating too, you got me thinking about how doing physically challenging things can actually lead to you being more mentally prepared to handle some of the psychological challenges of let's say a major failure professionally or in a personal relationship, a period of time where no matter who you are, it's gonna sting. If you're someone who has pushed yourself physically, you know what it's like to push through some of those barriers when you're riding your bike up a hill or on a long run or something like that. It kind of puts those other challenges in perspective in a way. Maybe you can talk a little bit about your experience.
Yeah, because it throws you into that just kind of a situation filled with adversity where it's oh, my body hurts right now. Mm-hmm. But then when you can push past that and you realize oh, if I put my body through that adversity, I'm going to be, my body's going to feel better. It's going to look better. I'm going to have more energy, and I'm going to be a more capable human being because I'll have a body that can endure. And then you realize that putting yourself in that adversity leads to benefit in your own life physically. And so I think then if you can understand that concept, you understand that suffering can lead to transformation, and discomfort can lead to transformation. And that's an important thing to just understand, and then be able to transfer that over when you're taking on mentally challenging things as well.
Mm-hmm. It's they tell you growing up, it's always grow through grow through what you go through, or whatever these phrases, on a intellectual level that challenges can lead to growth, but until you've actually applied that mindset to a challenge in your own life, you're not really going to see the power of it. Positive self-talk will go a long ways. When you're feeling down or something shitty just happened, it's okay, I'm capable. I'm gonna, there's all these other things that are good right now. And I've probably mentioned this, but my mom always says bad things happen so that worse things don't happen. You get a speeding ticket because you're going to get hit by a bus 2 blocks up the street. So reframing things in these certain ways, this goes back to mindset, but in a way that allows you to stay positive about negative things in your life. And not necessarily major failures, but we can easily get triggered by just a small little, literally losing a parking spot. People lose their shit over that. But, personally, I wouldn't freak out too much about that. Maybe a little younger Kyle would have, but even slightly bigger things, I have a hard drive that failed with a lot of data on it. It's a couple years ago that probably would have bothered me more, but I've just been through more challenges and I've dealt with these things in the past. It's okay, assess the situation. How bad is it? No one's hurt. Everything's going to be fine. It helps keep things in perspective. So I think, yeah, dealing with adversity is like a good first bullet point too. And like a reason why, like to think about like applying this to your own life, right? It's like, how do we intentionally seek out these challenges when as a kid we got them naturally just by having to learn about the world, and now it's like we're kind of, you know, figured it out, and now we just, you know, drive to work and do our same similar task every day, or maybe it's like we just fall into habits more easily as we get older. So talk to me a little bit about like how you currently today in this past year maybe have applied this concept to yourself.
Yeah, I think it's good it can be a really fun thing for you to dive into this world as well. Cause like just because something's hard doesn't mean it's not necessarily fun as well, right? Because I think when we're encouraging people to do hard things, it's not necessarily like things that are not enjoyable. It's for me.
I forget that people don't enjoy like hard workouts.
Yeah,
it sucks when you're doing it, but afterwards you feel great. Stoked about it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then you realize that you can push through that first initial moment of when your body's telling you that you like can't go any further. And then once you realize that, you feel more capable, and then you keep doing that. But for me in my life, I feel like having this concept and this knowledge makes me try to do things that I'm feeling interested in that maybe I've just like never tried before. And like surfing is that example for me recently. I've lived in California for like a handful of years now, but I'd always like kind of had an interest in it, but I was always a little bit nervous to just jump into it because I didn't want to look like an idiot. And then I finally got to a point where I was like, no, like, why am I letting that fear keep me from doing that? And so it's kind of like, I think it's important to jump into something where you have to take the beginner's mindset to it, because I think it creates humility, and then it also trains your brain to think of how, like, to keep track of incremental progress, I think, which is like a huge trigger to happiness when you expand that into your own life. But like for surfing, I mean, we just talked about this before we jumped on the pod, but it's like you get out there on day one and you can barely even paddle out. Like the board is wobbly underneath you, and the currents of even just like the stand of like the non-wave water is like throwing you off balance, and you're trying to sit up and wait for a wave on your board, and you're like falling off. The board's like going up in the air, and you're like falling into the water, like all this stuff, and you just look like a goofball out there. And so like that kind of sucks, and that's like an ego shot for a lot of people too, and it was for me too, and it's frustrating, and because you see these other people who look like they're just ripping these waves so easily, and it's like they're just look so like beautiful and elegant, and they're making it look so easy, and meanwhile you're there like trying to even sit on your board, and it's just, but then, you know. And it's easy to get to that point and be like, oh, I'm never going back out there again. Like, that's too much. Like, I didn't like that.
Yeah,
like
if you go on like a family vacation maybe, and you like try it once. That's the story I hear. Like, I've tried surfing once, but then of course you're not going to enjoy something that you've tried once that's really difficult, you know?
Right. But then even like time 2 through 20 is still really pretty bad. Honestly.
That's
like,
the truth.
And even longer than that too. You know, like
it takes a long time
to get good at it. But I think being able to put yourself through something like that, and then get that rush when you do catch a wave, and then how much fun it is, and then so you realize that, but you wouldn't have gotten to that point unless you stuck it out and stayed in the water and pushed yourself past those points of like just being really bad and uncomfortable out there. Like it's that same story of discomfort leads to transformation, but like, you're not going to get to that transformative place unless you give yourself the reps of doing that thing that's difficult over and over and over again, and incrementally moving forward and progressing, and just at a slow rate. But the progress is happening in your ability to keep getting out there and doing it. So that's been the one that's recently, I feel like I'm getting pretty decent out there too.
Are you?
Yeah. Like, I don't know. I mean, I've been doing it for probably like
every couple times you go out, you're still seeing yourself improve though, right? Like
definitely.
Me too. Like
100%.
I mean, I'm not surfing, right? I haven't surfed in a couple weeks now, but it was literally like each time I went, I was like, wow, I'm picking up this little small detail and this little small detail, where when you first get started, you don't even know the details.
You don't even know what to think about.
Like someone would tell you like, yeah, like arch your body like this as you're getting into the wave at the exact moment you like do a certain paddle or whatever. And that's just like way too much for your body to put together.
Yeah,
but just by doing some reps, you start to make it muscle memory. And I think, I've learned a lot from surfing as well. And when you were describing like paddling out into the surf, God, let me just tell you this. My buddy Brooks was down in town, and we tried to paddle out the San Pancho surf like on a windy day when the waves were just like one after the other. Like I get all the way out and I'm like so happy. I'm like, yes, I made it to the outside of like the break and I'm going to be able to like try and catch a wave at least. It was windy, so I had a low chance. And I just leash snaps, board goes to shore, and I'm just swimming in like not huge waves, 3 to 5 foot waves in like a shallow, like low tide, like with rocks and stuff. And that was brutal. And it was just like, I got out of the water, you know, I'm sure a lot of people saw me just absolutely tank and struggle for like 20 minutes. But I think you made a good point about like doing stuff that other people are going to know you're not like really good at. There's something like uncomfortable about other people like judging how good we are at something. And if you have to ignore that.
And that you have to ignore it. Yeah. And that transfers well also to life, right? Because in order to accomplish something that's different or that's progressive, you kind of have to be willing to put yourself out there and stand for something that you believe in that maybe isn't the norm or maybe isn't accepted on a mass scale. Mm-hmm. So like training yourself to get past that point of insecurity and uncomfortability with putting yourself on display, I guess you could call it. It makes you act from a more truthful place of who you are, because then it's just like you drop all that notion of caring about how it's going to come across or what it's going to look like, and then you just do it for you. And then that's when you actually see real improvement and progress, because you've stopped caring about the things that don't actually matter and started focusing on the task at hand. And then that's when you actually start to see progress in your own work, when you kind of like put the blinders on and focus on your own, stay in your lane and focus on making improvements day to day, which is pretty cool, I think, and really important to kind of incorporate that in your life.
100%. The other potential way to challenge yourself that I thought of when we were breaking this one down was just like a creative project. So like there's the physical aspect of like, if you push through physical challenges, like surfing is physical, but it's also like there's technique to it. So I think outdoor sports like bouldering, climbing, even cycling, running, like some of these things that require technique and physical exertion, you might even get best of both worlds.
Yeah.
Like I think that's why surfing is so like perfect for this analogy, just how hard it is and also physically difficult. But the other one is a creative project. You know, you don't have to necessarily have it be physical. Like a lot of people have different things that they're lacking, or they feel like, oh, maybe you already are working out on a consistent basis, but you're not challenging like the mental side of like your desire to solve problems. And there's that study, I couldn't find the actual study, but I heard about it on a podcast, and I start half my sentences these days. I heard about it on a podcast. But basically this study studied Alzheimer's, like outcomes and like problem solving over the lifespan. So if you solve more problems later in life, you're going to have a less chance of a neurodegenerative disease than someone who just kind of like sits on the TV and just gets, you know, doesn't solve any like actual problems. That's why old people always do like crossword puzzles, stuff
Sudoku
like that.
And like, crosswords and stuff.
There's something to that.
Yeah. Seriously.
So yeah, creative project. And for me, that film Still Skiing was a huge challenge for me last year. It was like the first time I actually tried to tell a story with film and beyond just like a kind of vlog style. Like, oh, here we are. I tried. And yeah, just like learned so much through that intellectual process of like humbling myself through like talking to people who are more knowledgeable than me, for sure, was super helpful, because I come at them from this very like open to input like situation where I'm like, hey, this is where I'm at. What do you see? Like, I'm totally open to criticism. And I think maybe that's something with doing hard things. You have to be, when I'm out there surfing, I'm like, yo, did you see how I like got slammed by that wave? And like, what can I do to avoid that? And this guy's like, oh, you're too far forward on your board. Like, oh, let me tell you this other tip that you didn't even ask about.
Yep.
So I think tying it into like just our mindset to being open to sucking at things and getting after it in a creative project and physical, it's both huge.
Yeah. And just jumping into things that, are challenging. And so for like the mental challenging part as well, like for me, it was starting companies, starting brands. And just because at one point that starts with, you know, in my case, 2 guys in a room and like trying to be like, all right, where do we go now? Like we have the ideas and like, but that's it as of right now. And like we have there is only, it's up to you. And so like, it's a huge mental puzzle. And that's another thing we actually talked about in terms of doing things that are hard is like puzzles. That'll train your, train your brain in kind of and I hate
some
puzzles.
Settlers of Catan maybe is pretty intellectual.
It's so funny because those are two things that I've specifically voiced a distaste for in the past like couple months. And maybe I need to go towards that and play some Catan and do some puzzles. But I mean, I think like for the brands and the company thing, it is like a big puzzle because you're starting, you know that you need to put together one solid, cohesive piece of a finished product, whatever it's going to be. And you're starting with a lot of pieces all over the place. And, you know, like sometimes you can identify what like those pieces are, but you know that they need to turn into one cohesive project. And so that's an extreme mental challenge. And I was either dumb enough or smart enough to turn that into my full-time occupation. And it has been, I mean, looking back, like I'm so happy that I chose that route, and I would choose it like 100 times out of 100 times, like moving forward, just because, but it also is difficult because I feel like my brain is constantly going and it's just constantly on, and there's a million things rattling around in there about 3 different brands and companies constantly. And so, but when I look back on the past 3 years and everything that I've learned and the people that I've gotten into contact with and the people that I'm now doing business with and the place that the brand is at now compared to where it used to be, it's like night and day. And there's no way that I would have picked all that up in such a rapid amount of time if I didn't just go towards the things that were most difficult and kind of just take on that challenge because I don't know. I'm kind of on a tangent at this point.
No, I'm asking like, so I have a question, which is like, as you started to like, you know, you had the idea, you know, of course, like everyone's had some idea for a business, but like what percentage of people actually like even start to execute or like even work on it at all? Like you, in that moment with Roddy, you decide, okay, we're going to do something. And then the question is like, over time, does it become easier, less painful, like similar to surfing when you go out, like you can kind of like, you can still make mistakes and fall, but like you know how to get back on the board faster and get back to the wave faster. Like, Is there a parallel in entrepreneurship for you? Like where you make similar mistakes to what you made years ago, but they don't. It's
at a different scale, which is, that's what you start to realize because it's like, and we have to constantly remind ourselves of that too, because, and I think this is probably true across the board. If you ask any entrepreneur, it's like, they're always on their way. They're always getting somewhere, still creating, like it's never a done, finished product. And so I think it's important to remind yourself along the way, like Roddy and I have to be like, okay, zoom out of this problem that we're dealing with and just understand the fact that like a year ago, this would have been a way different conversation. And like, we're kind of fortunate to even be dealing with the levels of problems that we're dealing with now, because that means that we've made a ton of progress in our business. But like at the time, it's not easy to always see that because you're so caught up in like the problem at hand. So I think having those, those reference points along the way are important too.
Yeah. But did you know that challenges just get bigger and harder? Because like I feel if you are just getting started and it's super hard and you know it's going to get harder, it's easy to be like, no thanks. You know, did you know that, or has this been something that over time you learned and have come to grips with? Like, what's been the process there?
Yeah, I guess like when you're starting out, you just think you're going to reach a certain point and then everything just becomes, easy breezy and it's all good and everything just runs smoothly and how it should. And then you start to realize that that's a bit naive. And I mean, you can still get to that point, but there's just like different levels of problems, and your ability to problem solve is going to be, it's going to exist as long as you are alive. It just comes in different ways. And so that goes back to the importance of just training it in however you can to be able to like think creatively, think around problems, think through them, look at things from different angles, and just take on challenging things so that your brain can think that way. But yeah, I don't know. I think there was a quote, and now I can't remember who said it, but just talking about like with every step that you take in terms of like success or whatever you want to call it, but just like with every new accomplishment comes a new set of problems that you didn't even know.
It's like a video game.
Exactly. It's a different level of problems. But in order to unlock that next set of problems, you got to get through your first set. So it's like a constant problem solving game. And that's good for the brain, I think. That's how the brain exercises. And that's what...
Well, that's what I'm kind of asking. Like, does it get easier? Like, does your ability... Because Chase Jarvis talks about this Maya Angelou quote where it's like, the creativity is an infinite resource. The more you use, the more you have.
Right.
So when you're first getting started, it's like overwhelming to like try and build a business. Like that's insane. But if you build these creative muscles and you start to see how things come together, like you start to acquire the knowledge similar to surfing again, like eventually you're like building the creative muscle essentially is their theory. And I like buy in 100%. So did that happen to you with building a business? And like talk about the creativity involved in like carving a path without somebody telling you where to go, you know, like that's kind of like the nature of what an entrepreneur does. Like there's no one over your shoulder guiding you. Like you can take input from different people and you have with, you know, intention, but talk to me a little bit about like how you built that muscle that allows you to carve your own path. That's kind of like really what I'm interested in.
Yeah, I think it becomes motivating once you start to see how it works, if that makes sense. Like, and I think that comes back to being self-aware and tracking your progress, no matter like how small or incremental it seems. Just because once you realize that when you dive into a problem and you just decide that you're going to take it on and like start a business from the ground up or start a creative project in a place where you have to take a beginner's mind, like you become more aware of the progress that you're making. And if there's an end goal or like if there's something that you're moving towards, it releases these things in your brain that make you feel like you're on the right path. And so especially as an entrepreneur and feeling like you're starting with a blank slate, anytime that you have a situation that seems like it could be something that's within the ballpark or within your wheelhouse of what you think is the right path of like what the next step for your company should be, like that's a motivating feeling because you're like, oh wow, like I created this and now I'm having this conversation that would kind of or like take that next step or like elevate what I'm trying to do right now, or progress it in a certain way. And that's motivating because you realize that you created that. And I think you can give that to yourself too with surfing, like you talked about. You start to pay more attention to the incremental progress. You're like, oh wow, like I notice when I shift my weight here, it does this, but I wouldn't have even been able to understand that like unless I, you know, was doing this every single day and feeling what it felt like to be on the board and like slowly building my balance and all that stuff. So and then I don't know. I just think it becomes motivating when you see that your brain can overcome challenging things, and then you want to do more of it because you realize that you can, and you realize how much it brings to your life. Because like that, to the surfing thing again, I feel like we're beating it to death. But like when you realize that you can, that's when it feels worth it. Like when you realize that all of that hard work went into you being able to go into the ocean and enjoy Mother Nature's like greatest energy source basically, and surf and have fun and be immersed in the elements and pay attention to just that whole experience and enjoy it for everything that it can be. Like you earn that by your ability to just stay after it and get your reps in. And I think you'll start to realize that with your fitness, with your mental health, with your creative projects. Like the progress comes in the repetition.
That's a good reminder, like just knowing that, like when someone says like, hey, I made this progress, but it's like, oh, that took you 6 months or a year. Like you got to keep that patience and that perspective on, like I love what you said, just focusing on the incremental improvements rather than trying to hit these bigger milestones. Like I'm going to do X on a bike or whatever. I'm going to be at X amount of dollars revenue in this business or whatever it is, rather than just like focusing on the process. And because if you're too focused on one goal, you're not making it.
It's easy to glorify the goal and then like overthink about it.
And then you get there and there's not really much to it. There's like you said, another level of goals.
And then that makes you look at your life and be like, oh, fuck. Like, I've been neglecting a lot of these things. Whereas like paying attention to the small things and not glorifying that goal, it's like, yeah, okay, that's the big goal, but what are the things that I need to do on a day-to-day basis to make sure that I'm moving in that direction? And I think it's easy to overlook those little things of like, how are my habits? How's my health? What are my day-to-day actions looking like, and what type of output is that creating in how are my relationships, like all of that stuff, you know? So I think, and it all comes back to just, putting yourself in the position where you're doing challenging things in a lot of different departments, because I think that it just creates plasticity in the mind, which is a really good thing.
So let's wrap it up with how some other ways that we like think of to actually like train these like muscles to do hard things, to endure challenges, number one for me is the cold water. It's not still like a huge practice of mine, but in the last couple months, I've been doing ice baths once a week. And in just the past, I've done some cold plunging and stuff. And even just taking a cold shower is this like small little mental challenge. And cold water, there's something about it. It's really uncomfortable and stuff. And once you start to like overcome that like mental, it really is all mental. Like
totally.
I'm telling you, you can go in an ice bath for 2 minutes and suffer like you've never suffered before if you're in like a very like not calm mind state. Or you can do some breathing, become in a like get in a very calm like kind of like mind state, like nervous system state as well, and then go in 10 minutes of ice water and not really suffer at all, not be that cold.
Yeah,
it's crazy how mental it is. And so that practice of the cold water for sure is one like super powerful potential mechanism for this. I had a guy on Adventure Creator podcast called I forget the name of the episode, but his name is Jason Stoffer, and he started a cold plunge business. He talks about like general adaptive potential, or I might be mixing things up, but essentially the idea is like building your general like overall ability to adapt to things and to deal with challenges through like exposure to cold air, cold water, physical challenges. And I think we talked about mental challenges. So that's kind of like maybe a scientific term ish, but behind like what you were talking about earlier in terms of just like getting yourself in a place where you can deal with challenges.
Yeah.
So, what else you got?
Cold is good. Heat is also good. I remember, I mean, gyms aren't open right now for the most part, but I remember I used to really love the sauna and like testing myself, seeing how long I could stay in there, because it's a mental game, like you said. Yeah, just it challenges you physically, obviously,
sure.
Also because you're in there and
Different
you feel
type
like
of
you're
pain.
about to die.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like once you pass that 5 minute mark, you're like there's signals going off in your head that's like, dude, get me out of here. And like the further and further you can push past that, it's just kind of like you redefine your sense of normal. And then like but then you just it's that progress thing again. It's like then the next time you go back in, you can stay in a little bit longer, and then when you come out, you feel even more clarity and you feel more alive, and you're healthier because your body's sweating out all those toxins. You're getting cleansed, and so. But yeah, it's like.
And then there's the study that Dr. Rhonda Patrick talks about. It's about like saunas and lifespan. Like all-cause mortality decreases significantly with like a few weekly saunas. So we're talking about cold water, mental challenges, and like hot in terms of sauna. 3 different like almost anti-aging kind of techniques and things to keep in mind as we all grow up.
Yeah. I think the physical challenge is an easy, not easy, but it's a good entry point for people.
We can all relate to it, you think?
Yeah, to like prove this concept, I suppose. And just anybody can do it. You know, all you got to do is go outside and like run if you want, or just start to understand that concept that you can push a little bit past what you previously thought you were capable of. And then, train your mind to think like that. And then I think you'll make a lot of progress in whatever you're trying to do. Yeah.
And it's like you said, empowering to see yourself start to hit some of those incremental milestones.
Yeah. Like give that to yourself. Like give yourself the ability to see some progress in some direction, because I think that's such an important part of the human experience, is like feeling like you're on some type of path.
Celebrate the small wins.
Yeah. Shout out to Katie for sure.
Yeah. And then also not to cut you off, shout out to Chelsea for the Kismet cacao.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, we've been sipping on that.
We've been sipping on it, and appreciate Kelsey. Check it out. Kismet cacao is like super good coffee alternative. I'm liking it actually a lot. It's the first time.
It's really nice. Yeah, it tastes great.
Well, so let's wrap it up. Coming up on 30 here. You got anything else?
Just go towards things that are challenging, and just get after it.
I got to find a new challenge, and I'm back here. So
yeah, give us some suggestions. If you're listening to this, shoot us an email or a DM on Instagram and let us know the types of challenges that you're getting into. But yeah, this is getting me fired up to go on a trail run.
I know.
Soon.
I'm tapping my foot. Let's go. I want to go ride my bike.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks. And till next time, next Monday, we're out of here. Check out the symphonyco.com and the Symphony Co podcast on Spotify, Apple. Hit us up on Instagram as well. And yeah, appreciate it. Good to have you in person here, Matthew.
It's been great.
Yeah, it's been a blast. All right.